Welcome to my field of dreams. It reaches far and wide. To you it might seem nothing much, but I stand here with pride. If you build it, they will come.
Hi, I'm Nemo James, singer, songwriter, and author, and I'd like to welcome you once again to my podcast, Nemo James Travel Diaries. This podcast is ad-free, but I hope you will forgive me for including short excerpts of some of my songs. If you would like to hear more of the songs I include, you will find a link to them in the show notes. If you enjoy this podcast, please click the subscribe button and share it with your friends. It will mean a lot to me. On this episode, we will be traveling to Orlando in the USA and Costa Rica. January 2012. It was the year of my 60th birthday, so I got to choose where we went on holiday. I had no hesitation in choosing Disneyland in Orlando, for what better time to go on a back-to-childhood tour than before creaky bones, senility, and incontinence pads loomed up on me. It was somewhere near the bottom of Federika's list of desired destinations, but she was always happy to give something a try, and agreed on the condition that we incorporated it with a trip to Costa Rica, where we could stay with an old childhood friend that she hadn't seen for many years. Before setting off, Federika and I had our usual argument about when to arrive at the airport. I always like to arrive 3 hours before, and Federika prefers the last-minute method. This is one of the few times I get my own way with the unspoken condition that we leave 15 minutes later than agreed. After takeoff, I always look at my watch and wonder how I am ever going to survive the boredom. But thanks to my new netbook, I was able to play bridge, solve some tricky Sudoku puzzles, and look at a selection of my favorite videos. It was just as well, as the entertainment system on the Virgin Atlantic flight was terrible. There was a huge queue at Orlando Airport waiting to get through immigration, even though we were the only flight that had recently landed. Heaven knows what it must have been like when several planes landed around the same time. I was a bit nervous about getting through immigration, as they had a new system where you apply for a visa over the internet, an ESTA, and they made it clear that if I made a single mistake, I would be refused entry with undertones of Guantanamo Bay. I needn't have worried, as they didn't even look at my ESTA, although they still insisted on a full set of fingerprints and a mugshot. I had hired a car for the time we were in Florida and was impressed at how well organized it was. At the Avis car hire desk, we saw our name on a large display telling us which bay to pick up our car. The keys were in the ignition, so all I had to do was show my driver's license to the security guard at the gate. The next day we left free so we could recover from the journey and do some shopping in what they refer to as outlet stores, although I had no idea how they differed from any other store. The shopping centre was packed as the sales were still on. In one shop, I spent half an hour choosing a pair of trainers, but when I went to pay, there was a massive queue, so I put the trainers back and accepted I had just wasted half an hour of my life. Back at the hotel, there was a desk with someone selling tickets for Disneyland and Universal Studios. Before reaching the desk, we were ambushed by a woman offering us a special deal, saving us a lot of money. After negotiating for half an hour, I was about to hand over the money when she asked,
"What time would you like your tour tomorrow morning? At 9:30 or 1:30 in the afternoon? We will also give you a free continental breakfast."
"What do you mean by tour?" I asked, and she pointed to a card showing an apartment building. Alarm bells started ringing. "Are you trying to sell us a timeshare?"
"Yes."
I immediately went to walk away, but she stopped me and said,
"Our tour only lasts 2 hours, and in return, you will save $300. That's got to be worth it."
Federika was tempted, but I didn't trust her figures and didn't want anything to do with timeshare, regardless of how much it saved. We bought our tickets at the desk and calculated we would only have saved $40 if we had accepted the timeshare offer, although I wouldn't have been surprised if there were other tricks up her sleeve. Timeshare sellers have special powers that can vaporize all common sense in even the most sensible people. I used to work in a hotel in Madeira that used to promote timeshare, and people were making fortunes from the fallacy that by handing over a large sum of money, you would be part owner of a property. As for the methods they used to suck people in, my parents once asked someone for directions to a church where they wanted to go to Mass, and the person told them the Mass was cancelled and asked if they wanted to go to a timeshare meeting instead. They'd been tricked once before, so they ignored the offer and went to Mass, which, of course, was never cancelled. The next morning we got up early to go to Disneyland. On the news, they said that the day before we arrived was the coldest day for decades, and frost had killed a lot of the orange trees, which were a major industry in Florida. We were heavily dressed in winter clothes, and while waiting for the boat to take us from the car park to Magic Kingdom, I wondered how we were going to survive such Arctic conditions. Once we were in the theme park, it warmed up quickly, and I instantly felt the Disney magic, which connected me to my childhood. They were still playing Christmas music with that unique Disney sound. We both hated any kind of roller coaster, so a good place to start was the Tiki Room. It was in a large straw building with toy birds in every conceivable place, singing a really catchy song. It was nothing much really, but I loved it and was surprised and delighted to find that so did Federika. We did brave the Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, which by roller coaster standards was pretty lame, but still just about our limit. I had been worried that the queues might be bad, but we were allowed a certain number of fast passes, which we used for the attractions with longer lines, so there was never more than a 15-minute wait in most places. I loved all the silly little rides like It's a Small World, which took us on a boat around the world with a catchy tune playing during the journey. I loved the processions that went regularly around the theme park, singing and dancing to old Disney tunes. When it got dark, the fairy tale castle in the middle of the park was lit up with millions of tiny blue lights and was just magical. The next day, we went to another of the Disneyland theme parks, Epcot. I had heard a lot of good things about it, but had no idea what to expect, which is always a good place to start. As soon as we entered the park, we walked straight into one of the main attractions, Spaceship Earth, which was housed in a huge silver ball, the Epcot trademark. It took us from the dawn of man through to the present day. The park was divided into different countries, and we started in Mexico in a lovely little village square, selling authentic Mexican goods and a Mexican restaurant set at the base of the Chichen Itza ruins. There was even a ride in a small boat that toured through Mexico with hundreds of puppets singing and dancing. Outside, an excellent Mexican band was playing, and everything about the place made us feel like we were really in Mexico. From there, we strolled along a large lake through Norway, Venice, Japan, Morocco, England, France, Germany, and China, and in each country you could eat the local food, which was a relief after the fast food served everywhere else. There were a few rides which didn't look too scary, and we queued for one for half an hour before being told it was a roller coaster, so we had to abandon it and walk back down again. There was another ride called Soaring, which we were assured was not a roller coaster. It was so busy that we took a ticket with a time slot 5 hours later. When our time came, we joined the small queue, and, having already had to chicken out once that day, we were concerned this was also going to be scary. The problem was that all rides in all the parks had the warning,
"Don't ride if you have any of the following."
And then they listed every human ailment known to man. I suppose it is there to protect themselves against lawsuits. Because these warnings were shown on all the rides, regardless of how fierce or tame they were, they had no meaning. The ride Soaring had the usual warnings, so we were already a bit nervous when they opened the doors and led us into a large hall with what looked like medieval torture chairs. We nearly chickened out again, but a member of staff assured Federika it was a virtual ride, and if things got scary, We just had to close our eyes. We sat in one of the contraptions, and a bar came down to hold us in place, which did nothing to calm our nerves. The next thing we knew, we were hang-gliding over California. It was amazing, although I had to close my eyes when it looked like I was going to crash into the San Francisco Bridge. The great thing about Epcot was that you never knew what to expect, and at every turn there was something new to experience. In the area dedicated to the southern states of America, they had a choir dressed up like a scene from Gone with the Wind, and they sang exquisitely. Turn another corner, and a man was doing a balancing act with several chairs stacked on top of each other.
Long live the king!
In England, some of King Arthur's loyal subjects put someone from the audience on trial, causing hysterical laughter in the audience. We had lunch in Turkey while a belly dancer entertained us. Then she invited the audience to join her in some Turkish dancing, and, of course, Federika was the first to volunteer. At night, they finished the day off with a spectacular fireworks display over the lake. It was a great day, and I think I enjoyed it even more than Disneyland. The next day, it was Universal Studios, and by now the weather had turned so warm we were able to walk around in T-shirts, which was a great relief. We started with a 3D version of Shrek, and I was confused as to why they needed the usual warnings before going into the cinema. The film started, and apart from the 3D effects being astonishing, they came complete with other effects that were attached to our seats. When the donkey sneezed, something was sprayed on our faces to make it feel like donkey snot. A disgusting 3D spider hovered near our faces, and then we felt a puff of air on our legs to make it feel like one was climbing up our legs. Funniest of all was when Shrek got into a horse and cart and rode along cobbled stones, while the chairs jerked up and down as if we were in the cart with them. What a great start to the day. We went to one place where they got members of the public to appear in a film about an earthquake on a subway. They shot the film in 20 minutes, switching from scene to scene, and almost immediately played it to us, which was so impressive. There were so many things going on, and I loved it all. Even just walking around film sets was thrilling. The only thing I wasn't keen on was the Simpsons roller coaster. It was a simulation, so I knew all I had to do was close my eyes when things got scary. I ended up keeping my eyes closed most of the time, but the problem wasn't being scared. It was that the car we were sitting in was being thrown around so much that I ended up feeling sick. I had to lie down on the grass for a while afterwards to recover. We ate dinner there, so it was quite late when we left, and yet I still didn't want to leave. Federika admitted to me that when I first told her I wanted to go to Disneyland, she was dreading it, but I was very happy to hear that she enjoyed it as much as me. Next morning I woke at 5:30 to go on a 6-hour bass fishing trip while Federika went shopping. I met my guide, who had his boat on a trailer, and we drove the few miles to Lake Toho. Looking at his boat, it was not surprising that the fishing trip was so expensive, but it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and Florida was famous for its bass fishing. It was a small boat, but full of the gadgets needed to fish in those waters, and it had a 200-horsepower engine. It was a beautiful morning, but being so early, it was still very cold, so when we took off across the water at high speed, I was frozen. My hands were especially cold because I couldn't put them in my pockets as they were needed to keep my woolly hat from flying off. We stopped near some tall reeds where the bass were usually found. The large lake flowed into the Everglades and was packed with wildlife, making an abundance of noise. It was so quiet with the water like glass, and when the sun rose, the entire sky turned red. We moved from place to place, but the fishing wasn't very good. I ended up catching 4 bass, with one of them being 3 pounds, but I reeled them in like they were small sacks of potatoes without any fight. The next day, I was chatting to someone at the hotel who was a keen fisherman, and he said the lake was overfished, so there was rarely anything above 4 pounds. I really enjoyed the day, but won't be doing it again.
24 fading leaves have fallen from the tree, with silent echo from fading centuries past. Fleeting thoughts of summers gone, with loves that came and went, while sand was falling slowly through the glass. A time of warm reflection, floating gently by, the daylight pattern relayed once again. A time to open palms and pass on our borrowed gifts, putting down the sword to reach out for the pen.
Universal Studios Island of Adventure was sold as a separate theme park to Universal Studios, even though they were next to each other. We had no idea what it had to offer, but as a package, it only cost a little extra, so we decided to go there on our last day. The main attractions were roller coasters and a couple of water rides. There were 2 water rides. The first was Jurassic Park, where we went slowly through prehistoric times while occasionally being attacked by a dinosaur or some other kind of scaridactus. It was fun, but not that scary, considering the models looked like they had stepped out of giant Christmas crackers. At the end of the ride, we went down a steep water chute into a small lake, creating a big splash at the bottom. People at the front got wet, but as we were sitting at the back, we didn't do too badly. The other water ride was the Popeye Raging Rapids water ride, where a group of us sat in a round rubber raft. We inspected it beforehand and saw people getting off very wet, so we thought we would be clever and paid an exorbitant price for 2 plastic ponchos. We were with a family of Brazilians who had not bothered with ponchos. I thought the idea of the ride would be to go to places where 1 or 2 of the people got a bit wet, but I couldn't have been more wrong. The whole thing was designed to give everyone a thorough soaking, and if you managed to avoid one drenching, you were spun around and thrown into another one. 1 minute, we were directly under a waterfall, and the next, water cannons fired at us from every direction. Of course, it was hysterical, and the 2 young children in the raft loved it, but all Federika and I could do was try and maneuver ourselves into positions where we could stay as dry as possible. It was futile, and the stupid ponchos had press studs on the sides which came undone in the first few minutes. I did manage to keep my t-shirt reasonably dry, but my shorts and underpants were drenched. Fortunately, I had a spare pair of shorts with me, but I had to spend the rest of the day without underpants with my John Thomas flapping around, so by the end of the day it was quite sore. Federika had to buy a skirt, so at least we were both dry, but we saw the Brazilian family an hour later and they were still soaked to the skin. There was also a large area dedicated to Harry Potter, which Federika and I knew nothing about, but it was still good fun and we enjoyed riding around the park on a witch's broomstick. For the next part of our holiday, we drove the 390 miles to Key West. The first 200 miles were boring motorway driving, but when we got to the Florida Keys, the scenery became much more interesting with the sea on both sides of the 2-lane road. There was a railway line that ran alongside the road, but it had obviously not been used for many years. Our hotel was on Duval Street, and we were surprised at how lively the area was. There were bars everywhere, and most of them had live music. Even in the streets, there were a lot of impressive acts, like the drummer playing on the pavement using a drum kit made up of plastic buckets. A man was standing by a push bike with a little dog in a basket in front. The dog was dressed up with clothes and a hat, which sounds cruel, but the dog appeared to be loving the attention. I went to take a photo, but the man stopped me and said I had to pay $10 for a photo. The next day, we took a bus tour, and the driver told us all about the history of Key West and pointed out its many historical landmarks. The most famous landmark was the house where Hemingway once lived and wrote some of his books. They also pointed out all the bars that Hemingway used to frequent, including one owned by his good friend Sloppy Joe. More important for us was the landmark where the first key lime pie was made, so that went to the top of our list of places to visit. In the afternoon, we did a tour of Hemingway's house, complete with a very good guide who told us all about Hemingway's life and what an amazing character he was, although sadly, he was afflicted with manic depression, which led him to suicide. We were shown the desk where he wrote his most famous book, A Farewell to Arms, which was one of my favorites. There was an American coin set into the concrete patio, and legend had it that Hemingway threw it in the wet cement, saying to his second wife, Pauline,
"You have spent all but my last penny, so you might as well have that."
The museum was also well known for having dozens of cats, half of which had 6 toes. They all originated from a cat that was given to Hemingway by a ship's captain. That evening, we went to Mallory Square, which was famous for its sunset celebration, being the southernmost point of the United States. A Jamaican man with a guitar was singing the old calypso song Island in the Sun, giving the place a very special atmosphere, and when the sun finally disappeared, everyone clapped. Then the street entertainers started their shows. There was a 52-year-old man doing acrobatics, and 2 juggling fire-eaters on monobikes. A very funny escapologist got Federika and another woman to assist him in his act. The next day, we enjoyed the Wreckers Museum, which explained why Key West became one of the richest towns in the USA. The coastline was one of the most treacherous waters in the world, so a lot of ships sank with their valuable cargo. Recovering the goods was very dangerous work, but people were allowed to keep whatever they salvaged, so it was very profitable. What made the tour magical was that the guide was an actor who played the part of the leader of a salvaging operation, making it far more lifelike.
He had about a half dozen ships like that. Not too big, good enough to sail around between all the islands. He had marines and cannons and all that good stuff. And he went through and cleaned out all the pirates and the riffraff and the false lighters and all that sort of thing. Said he did anyway, and as far as I know, he got the job done.
We really enjoyed Key West, but it was definitely not a place for anyone suffering from alectorophobia. That is a fear of chickens, and yes, it is a real thing. They were everywhere. In open-air restaurants, they would sit all around you, and even jump up onto your table. The cockerels didn't just crow at sunrise, but all day and all through the night. As a tourist, it was great to watch them strutting around like they owned the place, not so much being woken at 4 a.m. But the locals were divided into those who hated them and those who loved them, and it caused so much controversy that there was something referred to as the Chicken War.
There's a monkey on the line, there's a goat up the tree, there's a dog in my way and he won't look at me. Is this my life, or is it a dream? There's a woman in the water, a no one in the boat, a man in the junkyard trying to find his boat. It's the damnedest thing I ever did see. It's a crazy world, crazy world. It's a crazy world, crazy world.
So there we came to the end of the first part of our holiday, and whilst we had a great time, I was surprised at how much money we spent. I remembered America as being much cheaper than England, but that was no longer the case. Key West was particularly expensive, which was a shame as I was told it was a great place to eat crab and lobster, so we were expecting to eat it for breakfast, lunch and dinner, but it was so expensive we only had it once. We left Key West early for the 4-hour drive to Miami Airport to catch a flight to Costa Rica. We were at the airport 3 hours early, which was just as well because it took an hour to check in and get through security. The luggage conveyor belt wasn't working, and so men were taking our luggage with trolleys. We were told that it had not worked properly since it was first installed, which was surprising for such an important airport as Miami. It was a 2.5-hour flight to San Jose, where Federika's school friend Zaida was waiting for us. I had booked a hire car and paid extra to pick it up at the airport, which in reality meant a man met us and took us to the car, which was miles away. It was a bit of a shock seeing the state of the roads compared to those in Florida, but I soon got used to them. We spent the night at Zaida's house, and the next day we went to an area where they have dozens of restaurants serving food from all over the world, except Costa Rican food. I ended up eating Chinese food in a Peruvian restaurant. It was a great meal, but I was surprised to find it was around the same price as the UK, and wondered if there was anywhere left in the world where you could dine out cheaply. We set out on our 2-week tour of Costa Rica, starting with a few days near the coastal town of Puerto Viejo. Although the distance was only around 100 miles, it took nearly 5 hours to drive as the road was so bad and there were so many roadworks. Costa Rica had a lot of heavy rain, and the roads were built on the cheap, so a lot of mud and rocks get washed down onto the roads, making them difficult to drive on. In one section, we saw a large articulated lorry lying in a ditch with the driver outside waiting for someone to rescue him. Despite all this, it was an enjoyable drive through some interesting terrain. Some towns looked very shabby, but others had a cute Caribbean feel to them. As we got closer to our hotel, the state of the road deteriorated even more, with large potholes everywhere, some of which could just about be avoided and some of which stretched across the entire width of the road, creating a kind of inverted speed bump. We reached Totem Hotel Beach Resort just before dark, and were delighted to find a strange mixture of buildings in a kind of arty Caribbean style, owned by an Italian family. We were given a lovely large room with a balcony overlooking the sea and furniture made of bamboo. By now it was dark, and I went out onto the balcony to enjoy the sound of the sea when, in the tree opposite, I saw something having a good old scratch. I had no idea what it was, so I asked Federika to take a look. She thought at first it was a monkey, but then decided it must be a sloth, which is like a monkey on Prozac. We were very tired, so we went to bed early, but just before turning the lights out, Federika read me a report that said a few years ago Costa Rica had a big earthquake which raised the land 1.5 meters before putting it down again. This damaged a lot of the roads and bridges, so many of them were still awaiting repair. With all the talk of earthquakes, I was alarmed when, in the middle of the night, the already loud waves crashing on the shore suddenly turned into a deafening noise, which, because of my sleepy state, I was sure was a tsunami. It turned out to be very heavy rain on our tin roof, so I abandoned my search for a life jacket. The next day, we hired bicycles and cycled 2 kilometers into Puerto Viejo, which was like going back to the 60s with wall-to-wall beach bums. People of all ages had left the rat race to enjoy life in the sun and some of the best surfing in Central America. I liked pottering around souvenir shops, but rarely bought anything, so I surprised myself by buying an unusual incense burner made out of thick bamboo in the shape of a tree trunk, with all sorts of colourful things stuck to it. I also bought a coconut shell skillfully carved into the shape of 2 birds by a surly Rastafarian. He didn't like me asking for a discount, and I didn't blame him, as it must have taken him ages to make. How I wish every salesperson in the world would give a fixed price so we didn't have to feel obliged to bargain all the time because we can't win. If we ask for a discount, the seller gets upset that we are undervaluing their work, and if we don't, then they think we are stupid for paying the full price. For lunch, we sat at a beachside restaurant and ate fish while we watched the amazing surfers, wondering how they managed to survive the huge waves that frequently engulfed them. I had a lesson many years ago in Hawaii and spent 2 hours swimming out with my board, getting on and falling off and then swimming back to shore to retrieve the board before restarting the process. I think my total time on the board was around 10 seconds, which was surprising as I had done quite a lot of windsurfing, so I had pretty good balance. I never did know why they didn't give me a board with an ankle strap attached to it. There was a crowd of people watching a Labrador fighting with a crab that had large claws. The Labrador skillfully grabbed the back legs of the crab to avoid the claws and then swung it around, which must have annoyed the crab but didn't seem to do it any harm. The dog knew it was the center of attention and played to the crowd so skillfully that I was half expecting it to come around with a hat asking for dog biscuits. The weather was very changeable, with rain 1 minute and bright sunshine the next, but by the time we were ready to cycle back to the hotel, the clouds had lifted and the sun was hot. We spent the rest of the afternoon on the beach, where conditions were similar to Peru, with big waves and strong currents, so we had to be very careful how we swam. We made an early start for the long drive to Arenal, in the center of Costa Rica, at an altitude of 1,600 meters. We were dreading the drive, as although it wasn't that far, we were told it took around 8 hours because of the bad roads and slow-moving vehicles. It wasn't too bad, although for the last 50 miles there were a lot of juggernauts taking freshly picked bananas away for export. They were only small country lanes, so no thought had been given to the transport infrastructure, and at one point we had to wait for ages while a juggernaut negotiated a sharp hairpin bend with only inches to spare. Hotel Arenal Lodge was part of a national park, 5 miles up a very steep road. It had a perfect view of the volcano, which was the main attraction in that area. At night, you were supposed to be able to see the red lava flowing out of the top of the mountain, but it was nearly always covered in cloud. The tourist board conveniently forgot to mention that the volcano had not been active for over a year, so there was no chance of seeing lava anyway. It was still a fantastic place and well worth a visit. We booked a superior room in an outbuilding, but although it was a good room, there was an overpowering smell of dampness, so we upgraded to a room in the main building, which was much better. We sat on our balcony, taking in the magnificent view, when a parrot came and sat on the railings next to us. We found out that the parrot's name was Estefania, and she was part of the hotel, always showing up at mealtimes. We also saw a coati, which was about the size of a fox, with a long nose. Apart from the animals, there was an abundance of brightly coloured birds, which we attracted onto our balcony with some scraps of bread. The next day we spent at the thermal spring, which was part of the Hotel Tabacon Grand, listed as one of the best hotels in the world. We booked a package which included lunch and dinner and unlimited use of the facilities. Hot thermal water flowed from high up at the top of the hotel grounds into lots of separate pools below, so each one felt like our own private mountain pool surrounded by lush vegetation. The water was very hot, and once I had submerged myself, I lost every ounce of energy from my body and lay there in a state of total relaxation. We went from pool to pool all day, and as each one filled the other, they created small waterfalls you could sit under to receive a vigorous massage. On our last day in Arenal, we started with a 2-hour walk around the hotel grounds with a guide. The plan was for him to show us some of the many animals and birds that inhabited the area, but the most exciting thing we saw was a squirrel. He did show us a tarantula's nest, but the horrible thing was deep inside, which was just as well as Federika was terrified of them. He also showed us an amazing green frog that he let crawl over him. At the end of the tour, he showed us some snakes in cages that were only small but capable of killing someone in minutes in a particularly gruesome manner. He also took us on a horse riding tour that was included in the hotel package. I had been horse riding a couple of times, but still had no idea what I was doing. Fortunately, my horse was an automatic, so it just copied what the other horses were doing. In the afternoon, we went on a 2-hour river cruise in a small rubber boat. It was a private tour, so we had an excellent guide to ourselves. At first, it was thick jungle, but then we joined another river, which was much more open. We saw some monkeys, a sloth, and a crocodile. We enjoyed it so much that we vowed to one day go camping in a place like that. I was determined to live off the land, sleep under the stars, and maybe even grapple with wild bears.
Cool water drifting by. Cool water reflects the sky. Cool water running through my hand. Cool water.
Our next stop was on the Pacific coast. The first part of the journey went well, but then our sat-nav decided to direct us across a banana field. I don't mean a path through the middle, but an actual field full of banana trees. I ignored the instructions, so the sat-nav recalculated and proceeded to take us into a town where it directed us the wrong way up a one-way street, then to the front door of a funeral home, and I accepted defeat when we found ourselves pulling up in front of a cow's arse. Federika asked a couple of policemen for directions, and they gave us some complicated instructions which had no relationship to reality, but did send us in the right direction until the sat-nav decided to wake up. I had already paid quite a lot for maps of Europe and the USA, so it was annoying that I paid an extra £40 for a map of Costa Rica, which was so inaccurate. We wanted to stay at Conchal Beach, but there was only one hotel there, which was very expensive, so we booked a hotel in the next village, Brasilito, which was only a 15-minute walk to Conchal. It was the only hotel in the village and very cheap, so we weren't expecting much. Although it looked very tatty, it was on the beach with a pleasant restaurant and bar, so I thought it might be okay, but when I saw our room, my heart sank. It was clean enough and had air conditioning, but it was stark and depressing. The worst thing was that there was a communal balcony, which meant we either kept our curtains closed or left them open so everyone could look into our room as they passed. It also bothered me that there was no safe in the room. I don't usually regard it as a requirement, but at our first hotel in Puerto Viejo, there was a warning notice. It had a long list of all the things you had to be careful of, which included not walking around with any valuables and not walking around at night. It also advised who to contact if we were robbed and had so many warnings that I did a search for the percentage of tourists that survived a holiday in Costa Rica. I found nothing, so either there was no such statistic or it was so bad they had to keep it secret. At this hotel, there was a similar notice, with the main point being, don't leave your valuables in your room. They recommended leaving valuables in their safe behind the reception, and I knew we used to do that in olden days, but it was no longer practical. These days, apart from the passports and cash we used to carry, we have iPods, laptops, sat-navs, mobile phones, and digital cameras. Gone were the days when guests were expected to go to the reception every time they wanted access to their valuables. Apart from the inconvenience, I had read about things going missing from hotel safes anyway. I even read once of a young couple who had £1,000 stolen from the hotel safe, and not only did the hotel not reimburse them, but the couple still had to pay the hotel's charge for using their safe. We stayed there the night, and I walked around with all our valuables in my rucksack. Any doubt I might have had about changing hotels was dispelled when we were woken at 5 a.m. by chicken and cockerel noises that were so loud that I thought they were using microphones. Then cockerels started cock-a-bloody-doodling, and as if that wasn't bad enough, monkeys joined in with loud screeching noises. We noticed the night before that in the house next door, 2 ladders were leaning up against a tree for chickens to climb. When I woke that morning, I saw the branches full of chickens happily clucking away, oblivious to the possibility that they might be on the menu that night. We checked out the next morning, and the hotel was very good in not charging us for the nights we weren't going to use. We drove to a town called Tamarindo, and our new hotel was a big contrast to Brasilito. We had a 2-story apartment next to the swimming pool and had our own little terrace. The building was superbly designed by a German who, unlike the previous accommodation, had given great thought to everything in the complex. It was twice the price of our last hotel, but still very reasonable. It was in a lively area with plenty of shops and places to stroll around at night after dinner. Federika found the town too commercialized, but she still preferred it to Brasilito, where there was nothing to do at night. What surprised us was that there were a lot of good hotels and apartment blocks, but no proper roads leading to them. The high street was tarmac, but all the side roads were made of dirt, so every time a car went past, we got covered in dust. In the rainy season, those roads must have been thick with mud. We spent our first morning on the beach at Tamarindo, which was very pleasant, with the sea being much calmer than on the Caribbean side. But for the next 2 days, we took the 20-minute drive to Conchal Beach, which well deserved its reputation as being the best beach in the area. I had stupidly been a bit nervous about swimming there, as I had read they had nasty fish that buried themselves in the sand, leaving a venomous, spiky bit sticking out for swimmers to stand on. I don't usually worry about that sort of thing, but a lot of the shops were selling souvenirs made from the stingrays, and there were an awful lot of them. I just swam around, making sure not to put my feet on the sand, but just as I thought it was safe to stay in the water, I was zapped by a jellyfish on my back. It wasn't too bad, though, so I bravely soldiered on. Our apartment had a kitchen, and although we had no intention of cooking, it was great sitting on our terrace at night with a beer and some fresh bread and cheese. I loved eating out, but doing it 3 times a day got a bit much. Like most travellers, we always liked to try the local dishes with the romantic idea that they would always be something special, but in reality, local specialities can often be a letdown. In Costa Rica, you will be encouraged to try the amazing local speciality,
casado,
which is nothing more than a plate of rice and beans. There was an equally exotic-sounding dish called
pinto,
which was the same rice and beans, only mixed together instead of served separately. Most of the time we ate the same food as in the UK or Croatia, including cheeseburgers, pizza, and even the local version of Kentucky Fried Chicken. They did have some good fish, but it was always deep-fried and served with French fries. We still enjoyed it, but there were many better ways to cook fish. The best thing about our apartment was the hammock on our terrace. I loved lying in hammocks, but I've never mastered the art of getting into the damn things, and on one occasion I was so intent on not falling out that I missed it completely and landed on the floor. I learnt to fall at a very young age and can usually do so without hurting myself, but my pride took a bashing as a man was walking past at the time and came rushing over out of concern. For some stupid reason that made me feel more stupid than if he had laughed. One night we were woken by the loud, long scream of a man not far from us. I assumed it was yet another drunk who judged a good night out by the number of people they could wake up on their way home, so I turned around and went back to sleep. A few minutes later, we heard someone talking loudly, so Federika looked out the window to see what was happening. An American man was trying to explain to the security guard in terrible Spanish that his friend needed to be taken to the hospital. Feeling sure that the problem was alcohol-related, I was still unable to muster up any sympathy and so went back to sleep, but it affected Federika, so she lay awake for ages, even though the security guard spoke good English, so there was no need for her to translate. The next day, we discovered that the man had returned at 3 a.m. to find the gates to the car park locked. He decided to climb over the gates, which was a bad idea as the hotel was well designed, both aesthetically and for security. To stop people from climbing over the wall or gate, there were nasty spikes at the top, and he must have become impaled on one of them, and heaven knows how he got down. The irony was that if he hadn't been so drunk, he would have walked 20 meters further down the road and seen the gate with the security guard waiting to let people in. One problem we had in Croatia was stray cats, and as we were both too soft-hearted to turn them away, we sometimes had 5 or 6 coming to us to be fed at the same time. Within minutes of our arrival in our Tamarindo apartment, a cat appeared from nowhere, opened our front door, and entrenched himself firmly in front of our fridge. Of course, we couldn't resist feeding him, so from that moment on, he never left our terrace and insisted on sleeping on the living room sofa. On our last day in Tamarindo, we went on a boat ride up the estuary into a mangrove. It started with a large estuary where we saw a crocodile lazing in the sun, and then it got gradually narrower with the mangroves closing in on us from both sides until there was barely enough room for the boat to turn around. It was so peaceful and yet so noisy with so many animals competing to be heard. We stopped somewhere and walked to an area where there were a lot of howler monkeys high up in the trees. They were great, but I do think they should have moved around a bit more with some swinging from tree to tree or banging their chests or something. They made an amazing noise, which was more like an elephant than a monkey. The guide tried to imitate the noise to get them to join in, but they weren't fooled and continued the important job of doing nothing. For our last stop in Costa Rica, we drove to Quipos, which was near the national park area of Manuel Antonio. I thought it was a bit of a dump, but Federika thought it had character, which I suppose was true, but you could say the same thing about Alcatraz. We met up with Federika's friend Zaida and her daughter, and the next day we all went to the beach, which was part of the national park. It was distinguishable from a normal beach by the fact that you had to pay to get in and couldn't park anywhere near it. As far as the national park was concerned, there wasn't much to see, although we did see a guide point to a tree and tell his audience proudly,
"That is a toxic tree."
10 minutes later, he was still going on about the tree and its toxicity. I suppose the information would have been invaluable to anyone in the habit of eating trees, but for anyone else, I suspect it was just boring. We enjoyed our day on the beach and did get some animal action when we heard some young girls screaming not far from us. A family of monkeys had stolen a bag of crisps and were in the trees right next to us. They were blue monkeys and were cute little fellas that seemed to like the attention. Later on, one of them went carefully through a woman's handbag, taking out all the rubbish like a camera, purse, and mobile phone in search of something to eat. Shortly after that, there was more shouting further down the beach when a family of raccoons invited themselves to family lunch. I thought it was well worth the entrance fee just to get so close to these animals, but most people didn't seem to want them anywhere near them and kept shooing them away. Having paid for access to the beach, I was a little pissed off when the wardens came around at 4 p.m., telling us to leave as they were going to close the park. We ended up going to a free beach, which I liked just as much, and it had the advantage that, unlike the national park, it had restaurants, so we didn't have to mess around with a packed lunch when we went again the next day. It was one of the best areas in the world for big game fishing, so I would have loved to have gone, but the prices were horrendous. For a full-day boat charter, it was $1,200. You could share the cost with other people, but the last thing I wanted to do was go on a once-in-a-lifetime fishing expedition and have the person next to me spend 3 hours landing a fish while I sat and watched him. It was one of those things that would have to remain on my bucket list. We said a sad farewell to the coast and headed back to San Jose for another day before our flight to Miami. In the departure lounge, we met the famous dog trainer, Cesar Millan, who was traveling with 2 dogs in first class with him. We spent the day in town and visited the Gold Museum, which displayed all the jewelry excavated in Costa Rica over the last few hundred years. Many of the exhibits went back to 600 AD, and I assume were extremely valuable, as there was a huge bank vault kind of door we had to pass through to enter the room where they were kept. Our 2 weeks in Costa Rica were amazing, with perfect weather for most of the time, clear skies, and temperatures around 30 degrees. The people were warm and friendly, and I was not surprised that pura vida, pure life, was a big thing there. I saw one man wearing a T-shirt with 20 faces on it. Each one had the title of the face beneath it. There was sad, angry, sleepy, irritated, etc., but all the faces were the same. They were smiling. Rather than flying home from Orlando, where the holiday started, we thought we would spend a couple of days in Miami and fly from there. We checked in at the Albion Hotel and went for a stroll along South Beach, which was very close. I was never that keen on Art Deco, but Federika loved it, so it was a real treat for her to see so many buildings in that style. We did a boat tour of all the mansions owned by rich and famous people, which was good, but there was a feeling that we were encroaching on people's privacy, and our guide told us that Shakira had to move from there because she got tired of boats pulling up to her house every day. A tour of Little Havana was more to my taste and included a shop where they showed us cigars being made. It was strange that I had always hated cigarette smoke, but for many years I had a recurring dream of me smoking a big cigar. I wonder what Mr. Freud would think of that. Thank you for listening to Nemo James Travel Diaries. Photos and videos of my adventures, together with my music and the books I have published, can be found on my website www.nemojames.com/travels. You will also find details of my mobile phone app, Wordbanker, which is designed to help you build a foreign language vocabulary. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please click the subscribe button and share it with your friends. It will mean a lot to me. In the next episode, we will be traveling to Bangkok and Chiang Mai in Thailand and Luang Prabang in Laos.
Do you like the songs I've sung to you? Do you like the time that we've been through? Do you like my music? Do you like to sing along? Yes, we like the songs that you have sung. We like the friends that we've become. We like your music. We like your music. We like your music and the words of your song.